What's up, guys? Welcome to the Courageous Clarity podcast. This is the podcast that exists to bring the kind of clarity that would usher in the courage that you need to step into the fullness of your identity and destiny in Jesus Christ. Grace and peace be unto you today in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. If we haven't met yet, my name is Darren Stott, pastor, author, founder of Supernaturalist Ministries, and the creator, the instigator of Portals University, where we are helping ordinary people step into their supernatural destiny, and the founder of Supernatural School. God's doing all kinds of crazy things on the earth today, and he's using ordinary people like you and me. For more information on what we're doing, you can check out my website. It's my name, DarrenStott.com, DarrenStott.com. Do me a favor and hit the like button before you've even watched this video. Trust me, you're not just going to like it, you're going to love it. If you're listening to our podcast by audio today on any of the podcasting platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Podland, Podworld, Pod whatever, make sure that you leave a review of this podcast. You say, but I don't know how to leave a review, okay? Simply just put 5 stars. That means that you think this thing is absolutely amazing. And then, and then write something. Be like, my God, my world is different and changed because my eyes have been opened because of the Courageous Clarity podcast. That'd be super amazing. Also, send this out to a friend or two, that their eyes would be open, their heart would be enlightened, they'd meet Jesus and discover who they are in Christ. I am super excited about this conversation. This is like one of my newest friends. His name is Joel Thomas, and so we talk a little bit about how we connected. We connected through a mutual friend, Tony Markle, who is the host of The Confessionals, which is a very big deal podcast. Tony's doing such a great job. We love Tony, and I met Tony through Troy Brewer. And so all that to say, today's not about Tony. Today's not about Troy Brewer. Today, it's all about our new friend, Joel, who is the host of Free the Rabbits podcast. This is a podcast that is super dense. It goes super deep. I swear, every one of the podcasts that Joel does is like a thesis project. It's like for college or something. It's like he does these super deep research projects where, man, he dives into the unseen realms, into the supernatural stuff. And he did a series recently on the elementals. And I found that fascinating because I had a conversation with Troy Brewer this last summer about mermaids and sirens. And I wanted to do something with him for our 1010 group. And he started to talk about how mermaids are part of the elementals. And then I was writing for my new book, this project I'm just wrapping up right now. And I was writing about the 4 portals that are associated with the 4 elements of earth, water, wind, and fire. And the beings that are associated with these 4 portals. And it was Troy that told me that these beings are actually called the elementals. And here Joel is doing a deep, deep dive into who these beings are. And I thought, I gotta talk with Joel. I gotta get him on my podcast. And so this is 2 parts. The first part, you're just gonna get to meet Joel. That's gonna happen right here, right now. You're gonna get to hear his testimony, how he got involved in Freemasonry, how he came out of it. You'll hear more about his podcast and the journey that he's been on. And then we're going to go to the 1010 group, which is this super cool prophetic community of mature people that can handle the truth and know how to process through it. Because in the 1010 group, Joel's going to do an unpacking of the elementals and the beings that are associated with these 4 elemental portals. Fascinating stuff that's hard to find. And so that is what's going to happen right here, right now on the Courageous Clarity podcast. So you are in for a good one. Please connect with Joel. He's a believer. He loves Jesus. The Lord's using him to reach unreached people in a powerful way. be praying for Joel, connect with Joel, and it's my pleasure and honor to connect you today with Joel. So here we go. Without any further ado, guys, this is the Courageous Clarity Podcast. Let's go. My friends, this is one of my newest of friends, and so this is actually our first conversation that we've ever had. Joel Thomas, thank you so much for jumping on and doing this conversation with me.
I appreciate it, Darren. You reached out to me, and I know you know Tony, and I've been really good friends with Tony for about 4 or 5 years now. And you mentioned Troy Brewer, who's good friends with Tony too. And I've never met Troy personally, but I know of Troy just through the same circles that we roll
I pray you never have to meet him.
in.
Hey, let's explain this to everybody. So, I'm doing a show right now with Tony Markle, Troy Brewer, Joseph Z, Alan DiDio. I met Tony for the first time in November, and honestly I hadn't heard of the confessionals yet at that, which makes me like one of the only people on the planet that doesn't know about the confessionals. So it was funny, I got to hang. I knew he was a big deal, right?
Right.
And Troy talked very highly of him, and we got into this conversation, and and so Tony tells a story about this guy that where a portal opens up in front of him, and I'm sitting there, I'm listening, I'm into it because I'm all about portals, and it tells a story, and then I'm listening to Tony, and I said, Tony, I don't think that was a portal. I think that was a counterfeit angel of revelation. And he's like, what? And so and then anyways, we had just the best time. We hit it off, and now, of course, I'm a huge fan of his show. His show is wild. And then I'm writing a book right now on exposing kind of demonic portals and all the places that they are. I was writing about the elements as portals. And Troy, speaking of Troy, him and I had just had a conversations about the beings that are associated with the elements. And then you did an entire podcast, was like an hour and a half long, I think.
Yeah, I did actually 2 parts, so I got another part out now. So it's about over 3 hours.
Yeah, 3 hour deep dive into the elementals. And guys, we're gonna get into that. But that's gonna be part of the 10-10 group. First, I want to just introduce you to Joel. This guy is amazing. I go through seasons where I listen to different podcasts and where I'm like loyal to only one podcast. And I listen to it every day. That is Joel's podcast. It's called Free the Rabbits. And I gotta tell you this, Joel. We have rabbits. And somebody left, and I've got 4 kids, so it could have been any 4 of the 4 kids. They left the cage door open on Sunday, and one of them stayed, and one of them got free. And I told Andrea last night I was going to bed, this is a trip because I'm interviewing the guy of Free the Rabbits podcast on the same week that one of my rabbits got free. I was like, if this was a dream, what would it mean?
That's gold.
But dude, I'm
That's
geeking
gold.
out on your podcast, and I love it. And so let's just start with, dude, you didn't even listen to podcasts. Like podcasts, that wasn't even a part of your thing.
Right.
Let's start there. How did this happen?
Well, first and foremost, I've always been a musician. So I've done music for well over 20 years. And during 2020, 2021, when a lot of really crazy stuff around the world was happening, I was pretty headlong in kind of the anti movement during that time. And Tony, who I hadn't met yet, was also kind of in that same sphere as I was. So I had a producer who listened to a show send him my music, and Tony will tell it better than me, but let's just say that he was using the restroom and he got this DM and was like, check out this guy. And Tony's like, I get all this stuff all the time, whatever. And he listened to it the first song and he loved it. So he ran down to the studio, listened to the whole album. He reached out to me personally and asked, could he use my music for his podcast and some other things he was doing at the time. And through that, we started talking and we ended up talking on the phone, and he wanted to try to get me on his podcast. And this is when he was still living in Philly. And we were talking back and forth, and he was trying to figure out what angles would be good for me to come on the show because he wanted to talk about my music background, And I told him I came out of Freemasonry. Well, that perked his ears up big time. And he said, oh, I got to have you in now. So we talked about that when I went on the show, plus my own, and I guess in the mainstream world, they would call it paranormal. I would consider it more supernatural experiences during those times of being involved in Freemasonry and the occult, and going through the process of trying to go down the crossroads, right? Trying to achieve what you want to achieve through nefarious means. And, it was a long road back. And I won't say that in my particular story, it was one of those, hey, God met me and boom, I just turned right around. It really wasn't like that. It was more of a progressive progress over, I would say, 10 years that brought me to where I am
Wow.
now. And I think that it's different with everybody. I know with Tony, he talks about that moment where he just like turned and then he changed everything. Whereas with me, I came out of the church. My dad's still a pastor. I grew up in it. So for me, it's a little different because I've heard it all. I've seen it all. I read the Bible front to back, for me. And then for my dad also, he came out of the occult before he became a pastor. So I've heard all those stories. So I think I had to have more of a visceral awareness over a period of time. And I'm still growing, and I think as Christians we always do, right? That never stops. You never stop growing and you never stop seeing new revelations every day. And I think that was important for me. But Tony was a big catalyst for that very early on, because one of the things he challenged me was to seek God and what he would have for me. And I think that's something that stuck with me a lot from that moment to now. And I've watched over the past 4 or 5 years me change and grow and operate in a different way. And I'm still, again, growing and changing and evolving with new revelations that he reveals to me. But that's kind of what brought me to where I am now. But back to what your original question was, podcasting, it just kind of happened. Tony was a podcaster, and I didn't even really listen to podcasts. I always say Tony Merkel and Isaac Weishaupt are the two podcasts that I listened to first. And I've worked with both of those guys quite a bit since then, which was kind of crazy. So uh, I moved into podcasting because it just was kind of a natural fit for me. And I love research. And I've been in conspiracy since I was a kid. My parents always pushed me and my sister to always have an open mind and not necessarily believe what's being shown to you from mainstream outlets, always have a critical mind. So I think for me, just even as a kid growing up in the mountains of Georgia, talking about Bigfoot when I was 5, 6 years old and all these crazy things, I never really thought of it any different. But I've also watched the ebbs and flows of the conspiratorial and truther community, and the good, bad, and the ugly, which I think there's a lot of ugly right now. So, and that's why I started the podcast, Free the Rabbits, because what I've noticed, not just in the conspiratorial truther world, but in the Christian conspiracy world, people are just living in fear. They're constantly feeding themselves negativity. It's always the devil behind every bush, and nobody's actually trying to live life. And one thing that I've said numerous times, and I told my pastor this a year ago, and I don't think it ever clicked with him until I told him. I was like, heaven was never created for us, right? It was created long before us. So it's like earth is created for us. I was like,
Wow.
in the end, we're going to be here on earth forever. We might die and our spirits go to heaven for a short time, but we come back. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. Why are we not always trying to cultivate relationships and cultivate this world? Because that's what originally God set up for Adam to do in the Garden of Eden. That's from the start. We were supposed to take care of this earth. I always say, why are people so consumed with getting off this earth? Christians are so just tunnel vision. I got to get out of here. I got to, the classic old hymns where they sing, take me home to Jesus. They're great, but at the same time, we shouldn't be focused on that. We should be focused on connecting to people around us and bringing them to Christ, and also just showing love and compassion. And that's one thing that I know that I need to do with my podcast. Again, it's a mixed bag because you get a lot of people that don't want to hear love and compassion, and a positive outlook in this type of stuff. So you get people that get pretty angry when you do that. And yeah, it's just part of it. But I also realized there were a lot of people that didn't have hope anymore. And they were happy that somebody was able to talk to some of these darker topics and at the same time show that, listen, you can go down the rabbit hole, but man, you got to live outside of it. Like, you got to go outside and touch grass. And that's what I say at the end of every episode that I do: go outside and touch grass, like, please, because that is what we're supposed to do here on this earth. We're supposed to create relationships with the people around us. We're not supposed to live in fear, and we're not supposed to live in isolation.
Yeah, it's so good. We're in Seattle, and so I say something similar at the end of every message. I say, "Go outside and touch grass. Don't smoke grass."
Yeah. There you go.
Just kidding. Joel, you sound like me, man. The name of the church where I pastor here is called Eden, and that's because we changed our name after a 2-year study through the book of Genesis, where I spent probably like 4 months just in the first 3 chapters and really saying yes to the original mandate to humanity to be fruitful, multiply, and subdue the earth. And I absolutely agree. The majority of Christians have no theology for the earth. They just see it as something that belongs to the devil. It's evil, and God's going to suck us off of this thing so we can destroy it all because the whole thing was a botched plan. And so we spent 2 years in Genesis, and then we spent 2 years in Revelation because those two books were meant to go together. I think
Right.
the Bible ends the way it begins,
Hmm.
back in Eden, and so that kind of became the ethos or the operating system for our church here in Seattle. So when you were talking, I was like, dude, this is my language, and yeah. So praise God, dude. So it's funny because in our stream, we're kind of this charismatic-y, Pentecostally, thing where there's this avoidance of anything dark. I was a child of the 80s, wasn't allowed to watch the Smurfs, even Transformers for some reason. Transformers was seen as demonic. Yeah, I get the Smurfs. Smurfs, they are demonic. I get that. Those are portal opening blue.
Yeah.
That probably goes back to the elementals. I don't know. But but I would imagine that you and guys like Tony might trigger that kind of typical kind of charismatic thing where anything dark, you avoid it like the plague, lest you catch a demon. And you almost, for your day job, you study the occult. You go deep into the writings of guys like Aleister Crowley. You study their lives. You read their works, and does I guess my question for you, Joel, is like, um, for people that what's the question that people ask you? How can you do that? Don't Aren't you afraid you're going to get demon possessed? Are you ever afraid of that? What is that tension of investigating the darkness? Well, how does that feel operating in that space for you?
Well, I think for me, I already operated in that space before I came back to Christ. So I think I already knew a lot and I was already involved in a lot of those things. So I can speak to it because I know it and I understand where a lot of these practices come from, even some of the most benign practices like yoga, right? All of these occultists pushed yoga. And I'm not saying everybody is
Benign.
doing
No, just
right.
kidding.
Right.
Just kidding.
Yeah, and the thing is, and not everybody's doing yoga is going to hell. I don't mean it that way, but
Yeah.
it does open a physical portal and it allows entities to enter through ways that you're positioning your body. And these were ways that the early Gnostics and occultists were creating with a lot of these practices. And when you start understanding that, you understand what you need and don't need in your life, right? And I believe that God reveals these things at different points in people's lives too. So he may know you're not ready for all that yet. And you may be doing some things that aren't necessarily, you know, biblical or Christian. And he hasn't maybe revealed that to you yet. Maybe he's revealing other things to you and he's bringing you along, right? I know part of my calling is to help reveal some of those things to people that don't really understand them. And you ask, how can I read these things and be able to not slip into the darkness? Well, one, I came from that world and I understand that line between research and practicing. There's two different things there. Two, it's not everybody's calling. So not everybody is going to pick these books up needs to be picking these books up either, or going through them, because it might be something that would connect you to something that's not necessarily good. I always think about Star Wars and the old EU books that came out. And I remember when there was a story arc with Luke Skywalker where he started studying the Sith books and ended up going to the dark side for a period of time because he was just reading them just to research, but he was reading them. So, yeah, I think there's a fine line for sure. But I can say, I think because I'd previously come out of it, it's a little different for me. I can just look at this as just research and just being able to look at it from a purely academic paradigm. Also, I would say that when it comes to certain books that I know that are going to be really heavy with occult or whatever, I do a lot of praying before I even get into those type of things
Wow.
too. And
Wow.
I've got some books in my house that, I prayed over before I even brought in. I know what they mean and know what they are, and at the same time I know that I need to read them, I need to have them, because here's the one thing that Christians are really good at. They're really good at using the devil umbrella over everything. They'll say the devil, and there's no signifier for what that means. So when you're talking to people who are interested or who are deep into Gnosticism and the occult, or some of these other religions that have all of these things intertwined in it, when you just say the devil, I don't mean this in a mean way, but it makes you sound stupid, because they're not going to view it that way. They're going to say, well, you don't know what you're talking about. This entity is completely different than the devil. And they're not wrong either, because there are many other entities out there, but they're going to look at you in an aspect of you're not very educated. And in these types of viewpoints. And I'm not saying that you need to be, but I do think that Christians need to be more aware with how they approach people that are involved or interested in those things. If you don't know it, just say you don't know it. Don't go to pointing fingers and start screaming devil, devil, because I think that gets us in a lot of trouble, and it actually pushes people further away from Christ. And I do know for me, that's been my calling, is to be able to speak to these things. One, because I came out of it, and two, because I constantly research it. And a lot of it has been intertwined into the modern church without a lot of Christians knowing it. Gnosticism's been intertwined all through the church. We can go back to early Catholicism and how it was infiltrated. We can look at the early Gnostics and the war between the Catholics and the early Gnostics, and you had puppeteers puppeteering both and moving in and out of each. When you're talking about the Templars and the Cathars and the Mandeans and the Manichaeans, I could go down the list of all these different groups throughout time. But what they've done, and I told you this off air, what has happened with the church was when Christ left, you had the early church and they were persecuted. And then you had Caesar, right? And then you had Rome, which took in Christianity as the number one religion because they were a little scared because the Christians they were multiplying. So what they did was they put a label on it and they made it a state religion, is what they did. So not everybody that was involved with that state religion was evil, but at the same time you had people that were at that point moving the church away from the supernatural, while simultaneously you had groups like the Gnostics and these occult groups and these mystery schools on the other side that were touting that, oh, see, the church, they're trying to take you away from the gnosis, the wisdom that you're supposed to get from Lucifer, the light bearer. And that's just one name of one entity of many that they bring out. And so what they've done over time, they've made this side super attractive because it's inside of us, that divine spark that God puts in us, right? We were made in his likeness. So we always know there's something spiritual around us. So if you got one side that's touting God, but yet taking all the spiritual stuff out of it, and you got the other side that's saying, well, yeah, they don't want you to get to the real knowledge, all of this over here. Well, what side are you going to go to if you're really seeking spirituality? You're going to start going down these roads of the new age, which is kind of the modern occult movement now. You're going to start going down all these other roads of these different mystery schools, Rosicrucianism, all these different things, because you're trying to get to answers. And I think the devil's been really good over time and he's been able to play both ends of the coin. And I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle when it comes to Christianity, as far as real Christianity, the early church, right? And I think that's where a lot of us are trying to get back to, and a lot of us are noticing. And I'm telling you right now, so many young people are very interested in the truth, God. Like, who is he? Who is Jesus? Who's Yeshua? What does that actually mean? And when you strip religion away and you're able to show the true Christianity, I think people are able to see it in a different way. And I hope that through my research, I'm able to help people out in that way. And for people who are also involved in what Christians would say, the devil, that they're able to actually come to a realization themselves as well.
This is not a drill. This is an emergency. The veil between the natural and the supernatural has been torn. The unseen realms are no longer invisible. Pastor Darren Stott, founder of Supernaturalist Ministries, invites you to join the 1010 Group, a movement of awakened spiritual warriors committed to exposing hidden truths and fighting back against spiritual deception. Named after John 10:10, the 1010 Group equips you with exclusive tools and content to uncover the supernatural mysteries they don't want you to know, like the truth about pyramids, UFOs, hybrid beings, and more. As a member, you'll get monthly equipping videos revealing biblical truths about the paranormal, access to live mentoring calls with Darren Stott and other spiritual leaders, discounts to Darren's Supernatural School, Portals University, and Dream School, a private members-only Facebook group for connection and growth. This isn't just a course, it's a call to action. Join the 1010 Group today and take your place in God's Kingdom Army. Expose darkness, unleash heaven's light. Visit the 1010.group and get started today.
Yeah, that's so good. We do that. We will either just say the devil or we'll just say demonic. And like the word demonic becomes this huge blanket statement for just anything evil.
Right.
Anything that's evil is just is demonic, Maybe there's a lot more truth to that than what we know. But yeah, we come up with these blanket terms. And then at the end of the day, a lot of us have no idea how spiritual things really, really work. And again, maybe that's actually okay for some of these things. Like just bring it back to Jesus,
For
and
sure.
yeah, which is kind of interesting when it comes to. There's so many places I'd love to go. When you were talking, Joel, I just was like, hey, you know, um, I'll just hit on this since it's fresh. You talked about like Lucifer, right? The luminescent one, the one that shines light, that brings
Mhm.
gnosis, that brings knowledge. That was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it was like, why would the father want to hide this truth from his children, right? And
Mhm.
then that brings you into like luminescence or the Illuminati and this like society of like enlightened ones. This is my own word choice, if you will.
Yeah.
And and maybe this idea that the greater public they want the truth, they can't handle the truth, right?
Mhm.
And so that was all stuff that was kind of coming to that was coming to mind. I guess here's the question I had for you. It's a bit of a metaphor. When you have somebody that got that was an alcoholic, they give their life to Jesus, and now they're an abolitionist, and if they let's say they go to a restaurant and they see another believer from church and they're having a beer or a glass of wine, and they are just like, I cannot believe that person called themselves a believer, and I saw them having a glass of wine or a beer because they came out of alcoholism. There's no even grid for moderation. For you, Joel, coming out of like the occult and coming out of like this deep darkness, when you like if you go to like a church meeting, like a supernatural kind of thing, or you seeing stuff online, is it similar for you? Like when you see the supernatural being displayed in more like Christian environments, is there something in you where like it triggers you a little bit because it reminds you of practices that were being done in the occult, or you see kind of ties and tethers that go back to like Gnosticism, or is it do you ever experience that?
To be honest with you, I typically have a lot of grace, so it doesn't really affect me in any
Okay.
kind of way. So
Yeah.
I typically understand people's hearts and where they're really at, and I think that ultimately God does as well. Now, I do think these things can open up gateways to things being attached to us. And I think if we don't know that, then it's very easy for those things to happen. But I'm also very cognizant that not everyone knows what's going on. For instance, right? We know that over time, Disney movies have had a lot of hidden messages and hidden things in them, right? Do I think that everybody that's watching a Disney movie that's got a lot of occult things in it is going to hell, or it's triggering me to the point that I'm flipping out because they can't see what I see? I think that if I did do that, that would go completely against what I preach on my show, because we need to be able to understand where other people are at in their lives. And also, I'm not here to beat people over the head, right? And while there may be a few topics where I may draw the line pretty hard and say, listen, this is not good, and this is, you know, something that's probably going to lead you down a path of destruction, in which I do talk about the occult Gnosticism pretty heavily on my show because it just finds itself intertwined into everything. But again, I typically have a lot of grace when it comes to people and understanding where people are at, and just knowing that if I was to act that way, then that would also turn them off to a path to Christ too. And I think there's a better way to do it a lot of times, and instead of screaming and yelling. And social media's gave us a platform to scream and yell all the time. So you see Christians and
Yeah.
conspiratorial Christians, they get super mad about every single thing. And I tell Tony this all the time. I was like, man, it bothers me. I think Christians are some of the worst online of anybody. And man, you talk about they'll fight over everything, eschatology to theology, and sometimes, rightfully so. I mean, there's certain things, again, I'll draw my line in the sand, but I think there's a better way to do it a lot of times than just railing and, going on a 2 week bender fighting somebody online, which, by the way, I run all of Tony's social media. So I sometimes watch people argue for 2, 3 weeks over the same thing. And I'm just like, they're still going at it. This is crazy.
Everybody with a microphone kind of wants to secretly be Alex Jones, right? And so we just,
Right.
just like, let's go. Um, secretly, we never admit that out loud. All right, guys. So listen, we're gonna get into some stuff here in a second with Joel. For my benefit, I can't wait to learn more about the elementals. I find that just absolutely interesting. For the majority of my audience, even the term elementals is going to be a new term. And we'll be doing that in the 1010 group. So just want to invite you to check that out. So this is a bit of a prophetic community where we're learning together a lot of stuff that's taking place in the culture, and then how we as the church bring the message of Jesus in a supernatural way to disciple nations. Amen. So before we do that, Joel, your story is, I don't really know your story, but I know an aspect of it, that you were actually a Freemason for a while. And I find that absolutely fascinating, because it sounds like that wasn't a part of like you weren't born into that, right? Like your dad wasn't a Mason. And so that was like a decision that you made. And you seem like a young person, and from what I hear, young people really aren't engaging with the Masons like they used to. I don't know if that's true or not. So I guess I'm just curious, what was it about Freemasonry that was like alluring to you, that where you were like, this is interesting, right? Can you bring us? I'd love for you just to tell your story, and then how the Lord used that, to bring you to Him.
Yeah, I'll give you the company line first. So I always say that I did it for money, power, and fame, right? That's the typical, because I was a musician, and at the time there were a lot of other musicians, Jay-Z, Kanye West, Rihanna, all of these ones. And this was big. This was during the big Illuminati craze, where they were throwing up a lot of symbols and all of these pieces of iconography throughout their music videos. And there was Jay-Z. He was wearing a sweatshirt that said "Do what thou wilt," which is a very famous phrase from Aleister Crowley from Thelema, which was his religion. So all these things were popping up, and I was kind of at a point with music where I was good, but I needed that extra thing. And what is the extra thing, And I'm looking at these guys who are super famous, super wealthy, powerful, and they seem to have something else behind them, a different machine behind them. And I grew up in the church my whole life. And so the idea was there of, well, what's the other side got to offer?
Wow.
I've heard my whole life that, well, Satan's the God of this world. He'll give you these things. There's a price to pay, but he'll give you these things. Well, sometimes you get to that point, you get kind of desperate and you're like, you know what? Maybe selling your soul, whatever that means, right? And it can mean so many different things for different people. And I really think really selling your soul, you can't really sell your soul, right? You can always come to Christ. Christ has always got a path to him. Selling your soul, in essence, is going against your morals and beliefs to achieve something that is seemingly out of reach. And that could be sacrificing a family member or blood ties, blood oaths, whatever. We could go down that crazy rabbit hole. That's a long one. But for me, it was, how do I get to a place where I could even get the offer? You know what I mean? I would like to understand that. So I started talking to some people who were around me that were involved in various occult practices. I had one guy who would go down to Peru and train with shaman in the mountains, and he was showing me a lot of different things that I could do. And I really was noticing this thread with Freemasonry. All these guys are Freemasons, or at least alluded to be Freemasons. And that was always the gateway drug. I call Freemasonry the gateway drug. It opens the door to all the rest of them, because once you get into
Wow.
Freemasonry, you can kind of get into anything else, because there's multiple houses within Freemasonry too. It's not just one house. You become a master mason. At that point, you got the opportunity to go through different houses, like the red house, blue house. You've got Scottish Rite Freemasonry, you got the Shriners, all these different ones that you can now have easy access to, because you're already what they call on the level, right? And this is nothing that's not common knowledge that I'm telling today. So I was highly interested in it, and I had a roommate who was my best friend at the time. We were friends for years, and he helped me with music and a lot of other things. And he was an African American guy, and that's important to the story. So I ran into a guy at a job I was at, and I noticed he had a square and compass on his shirt. He was wearing a polo shirt with a square and compass. Got to talking to him, and I knew what to say to them, because there's a phrase that you say whenever you want to join. So I said the phrase, and he kind
Wow.
of raised his eyebrow up, and he said, "Okay." He said, "Listen, here's my card." And it was crazy, because he was actually the worshipful master of the entire lodge too. So I actually ran into the right guy, or wrong guy,
Wow.
however you want to say it.
Wow.
And I reached out to him, and he told me that we could come out to the lodge, and they do fellowship on Thursdays, and you can go eat and talk. And then, they'll defer to whether they think that you could be an option to join or not. So my friend and I end up going there. Well, let's just say this is in the South, and this was a all Caucasian, old money lodge. So we get up in there, and my buddy's with me, and he's got dreads down to his shoulders, and we walk in. Now, the worshipful master and his friend, they were younger, and they were really nice to us. They brought us in, we talked, and had fellowship, whatever. And obviously we can't, go to the meetings or anything. We're not part of it. And so they shot straight with us. I can appreciate it. They said, "Look, if it was up to us, we wouldn't care at all. And maybe 10 years from now, it'll be a thing that won't matter anymore," which it was kind of funny they said that, because almost 10, 12 years later, they started integrating the Prince Hall Freemason lodges and the mainstream lodges down south, which were already
Wow.
happening up north.
Wow.
So we figure out that, yeah, we can't get in there. So 7 months go by, end up running across a black guy this time, and he's got a big wooden chain with a huge square and compass. And so I go up to him, I say the same phrase, kind of did the same thing, raised the eyebrow, and he tells me to call him at a specific time on a specific date. He's like, "Don't miss it." So I'm like, okay. So I call him up. We get to talking. I tell him my story. I tell him what happened at the White Lodge. So obviously he's highly interested at this point, because they are a Prince Hall Freemason Lodge. And if you know anything about Prince Hall Freemasons, they're typically African American. It started with an African American back around the Revolutionary times, and it was Black people's first opportunity in the Americas to become a part of Freemasonry. So they had their
Wow.
own version of Freemasonry, which, again, back to up north, you'll see all races in both, in mainstream and Prince Hall. So that had long past up north, but down south it was way more segregated. Even we're talking even in 2012, you know what I mean? Which is wild to think
Wow.
about.
Wow.
So I talked to the guy and I told him my story, and he tells me, okay, call me a week from now, same time, same date, or the next date. So I talked to him again. He brings us out to meet the worshipful master at his property. We talk to them, and it's a whole process. We end up going through it, and we start the initiation process. So it was me and 3 other people that started, and by the end of it, it was just me. Even my best friend didn't make it. So it was just me, and that obviously caused a pretty big rift between he and I at the time. And it was interesting. I was the first white guy to go through this lodge in 100 years. Like, no white guy had ever been through that lodge. So, and it was one of
Wow.
the toughest lodges in the area that I was in too, to go through, because they would challenge you with a lot of stuff. It was a lot of book learning, a lot of things. And back to what I said earlier, that the the upfront story that I'll tell people, that I wanted money, power, and fame. Well, actually, the real reason I wanted to get into all this was knowledge. And I think that's the allure for people who are very interested in the occult and very interested in the gnosis. It's to obtain knowledge that nobody else has, and see
Wow.
things that nobody else has, get in contact with things that no one else can. It's like Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons and John Dee, Edward Kelly, all these guys would talk about meeting these praetor humans, these, what we call now non-human intelligence or off-world intelligence or interdimensional beings. That's kind of the ultimate goal, because once you reach that, and we can talk about Joseph Smith from Mormonism, and back to Aleister Crowley, their HGAs, their holy guardian angels, when they'll meet that angel reveals to them knowledge. And a lot of those guys will start a whole religion over just this entity meeting them. So it's like Master Fard that started the NOI, the Nation of Islam. He met a being that helped him reveal this knowledge of how white people were created and all these things, but it was very similar path to all of these other occult organizations. So when you look at how a lot of these occulted groups, and by the way, Fard was a Prince Hall Freemason too, by the way. So again,
Wow.
back to the gateway drug that these guys get into to then tap into this greater level, because it's levels to it, right? You can go through Scottish Rite Freemasonry and get to 33 degrees. Well, you can get to 33, but then there are other groups within Freemasonry that have higher degrees that you can get to. I mean, there's one group that you can get to 90 degrees, and there's talks
Wow.
about 360 degrees, and there are different aspects to how far do you want to go with it, right? How much gnosis, how much knowledge are you trying to get into? And I know we're going to talk about elementals, and we're not going to be able to talk about it without talking about Paracelsus, who was one of the biggest Gnostic alchemists of all time, that every single person who has studied how to get to the gnosis studies, because he went into everything from the homunculus, which is creating basically a shell for entities to inhabit. I mean, we've got these things being talked about for centuries, that, again, back to what we were talking about earlier, the average Christian has no idea about. And these things are happening right now within governments, within systems, within these mystery schools all around the world. They have been for a long time. And that is very attractive to someone who sees a very rigid religious structure at a church, who's taken the supernatural completely out of the Bible, and then they see that over there. Where you think they're going to go if they're really trying to connect to something spiritual? They're going to go to something negative.
Wow. 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 All right, Joel, we're going to have to transition because we only got so much time. But everybody, this is Joel Thomas, and you're going to want to, well, I shouldn't say that. maybe, if you're ready to go down the rabbit hole, just don't forget to come out and to touch the grass when you're done. But it's called Free the Rabbits. Is that right? Joel?
Free the Rabbits podcast. It's under Merkle Media, which is Tony's media company. And you can find it anywhere. You can go to YouTube, you can go to Rumble, you can go to Spotify, Apple, any of those platforms. You can catch it at. And I do video on YouTube and Rumble. So I put up a lot of pictures of a lot of people that I talk about, documents that I talk about. I try to showcase all that as I'm talking so people can understand and follow along. And a lot of these topics I'll spread out over 3 to 4 parts. So it may be a 5-6 hour series. I did an entire series on and I put this in air quotes, bloodlines of Jesus, which is a very interesting topic to Gnostics, right? And I broke down that those bloodlines exist, not what they're saying they are, but they are a lineage of bloodlines that they are protecting, not Jesus's bloodlines, because I don't believe that Jesus had kids, just for the record. But it was important to go through that process because I was seeing a lot of people talk about this again. I was like, man, I thought the Da Vinci Code thing was gone and now it's resurfaced in a whole new format. So I was like, okay, maybe I do need to talk about this because people seem highly interested in this. And maybe I need to show what these bloodlines actually are and what they're actually protecting when it comes to these royal families and some of these interesting things that are going on around the world, because it is all connected to the supernatural.
And for those that are in our tribe and they just watched the conversation we had with Heidi Love, Heidi is almost kind of a regular on your podcast. I just listened to the deep dive that you guys did of Aleister Crowley and Joseph Smith. I found that absolutely fascinating. And so you guys definitely go and check that out. For those of you that are in the 1010 group, we will see you here in just a second. We're going to dive into the elementals, the elements as portals, the beings that are associated with those portals, with those dimensions. And so, Joel, thank you so much for the conversation. I love and celebrate what Jesus is doing in your life. I love your testimony, love your podcast. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Darren.
This is not a drill. This is an emergency. The veil between the natural and the supernatural has been torn. The unseen realms are no longer invisible. Pastor Darren Stott, founder of Supernaturalist Ministries, invites you to join the 1010 group, a movement of awakened spiritual warriors committed to exposing hidden truths and fighting back against spiritual deception. Named after John 10:10, the 1010 group equips you with exclusive tools and content to uncover the supernatural mysteries they don't want you to know, like the truth about pyramids, UFOs, hybrid beings, and more. As a member, you'll get monthly equipping videos revealing biblical truths about the paranormal, access to live mentoring calls with Darren Stott and other spiritual leaders, discounts to Darren's Supernatural School, Portals University, and Dream School, a private members-only Facebook group for connection and growth. This isn't just a course, it's a call to action. Join the 1010 group today and take your place in God's Kingdom Army. Expose darkness, unleash heaven's light. Visit the 1010.group and get started today.